Do I always have to say welcome back to Total Ship Show?
I hate when you do that.
Well, like, how does it start off?
We just start talking.
And then how do you know the podcast started? Oh, because we have an intro. Oh.
I'm Malia White, real-life bosun and cast member on Bravo's Below Deck Med. Working in my industry can be very interesting. These are my stories. As you'll find out, my world is a total ship show.
Okay.
Oh my God.
All right, welcome back to Total Ship Show.
We don't have to do that.
I'm Malia White. This is Amanda. Okay, so last season we had a Dangers episode, so we're gonna do that again because we learn a lot from these. Yeah.
I learned everything. You basically just tell me a story.
Yeah, and this week's story is pretty crazy. So we've got a few case studies, but basically the theme is abandoned vessels.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Which I think we kind of learned about last season, but we didn't really know the full story, so we're going to dive into it a little deeper.
Okay,
right?
awesome.
Okay, so the first one I have for you is an abandoned bulk carrier, motor vessel Ula, and this story comes from 2019.
Recent.
And the ship, just to put this in perspective, this ship is 186 meters or 600 feet long.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so this is not a little boat. It's not, you know, something that might get abandoned and you never see it. This is a massive ship.
Yeah.
It's a bulk carrier. Okay, so in 2019, motor vessel Ula was abandoned as the company owning the vessel stopped paying for the wages and providing food, fuel, and water to the ship. So basically, the company couldn't pay to keep the ship going, so it costs less to just stop, you know, with like wages and giving it food. And without financial backing, it's really hard for any of the seafarers on board to go into port or get anything because, you know, they don't have the means to do so.
Yeah.
The company is what keeps the ship going.
Right.
And, you know, as a seafarer, you're not going to be like, yeah, here's my credit card, get some gas. You know what I mean?
Jeez.
Yeah, so that meant that they couldn't return to port, and the seafarers became stranded on the ship without necessary amenities.
So where did it come from? Where did the ship come from?
I don't know where it originates from, but this, so most of the seafarers on board, so there were 19 crew members on board, and most of them are from India.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and then of course, because it's 2019, COVID restrictions further shut down efforts to resolve the problem, resulting in crew being unable to get off in certain ports. So due to the lockdown, then the crew couldn't get off because the world was locked down and they're not going to just accept seafarers from all over the world.
So where was it?
This is in Bahrain.
And it just they just had to stop because they couldn't make it into port.
Yeah, well, they just couldn't get off the vessel.
How far away from shore were they?
It just says they're a couple miles offshore, anchored. Wow. So they're just anchored out, I'm guessing. Mm-hmm. But then during this time, I think I mentioned it, but most of the seafarers were from India. So after a year, some of them a year stranded on board, they did an 11-week hunger strike in protest for unpaid wages. Because basically the seafarers, you know, during this whole time, they're still on board in the capacity of a seafarer. They're still working on board. Regardless if it's COVID or not, they're stuck on the ship as a seafarer, and they're not being paid wages.
How is this legal? This is so insane.
Yeah, I know. And then, so they reported that they barely had enough provisions for one meal a day. Yeah. Yeah, so then eventually they went on this 11-week hunger strike in protest, and this caught the attention of the ITF, which is the International Transport Workers Federation. And basically, the ITF helps with a lot of commercial ships, and with problems such as these, they get involved and they try to fight on behalf of the seafarers to figure out, okay, the company doesn't have the money to pay, but we've got seafarers that are stranded on the ship. Where's the in-between? What can we do? You know?
Wow, yeah.
And especially, you probably saw the hunger strike in the news. It did make national headlines. It was all over the BBC. And the seafarers are holding up signs like, hunger strike, we want our wages, this is wrong,
Yeah, wow.
And yeah, the company was just unable to pay. And eventually the ITF was able to get some of their wages paid back.
How'd they get them off the boat?
Yeah, well, they had to get COVID testing in place for them. They had to get visas lined up for them and had to help them, but that's what their job, the ITF's job is to just kind of help the seafarers. So yeah, eventually they were able to, the ITF became involved in a battle to get their wages paid and to get them home. So finally, in 2021, in June, the crew were returned home. Many of them were on board for 31 months.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is insane.
And this isn't a yacht. There's not there's not tons of entertainment and lots of food and drinks and whatever. They were probably there under very poor living conditions. It says here they didn't have necessary amenities. Most of them got sick due to lack of medication. They didn't have fresh drinking water and they didn't have fresh food.
Do some big boats like this have, this is so insane to me because it's why was there an opportunity for them to get on the tenders and go to shore or what?
So a boat like this wouldn't have a tender.
Okay.
It's a massive bulk carrier.
But they don't have any type of vessel or raft or anything for them to get off of to try and make it to shore?
But the problem is so you might think they're right off coast of wherever, why can't they just go to shore?
Right.
These guys are from India. They might not have the necessary paperwork to go ashore, so they're not allowed to. And as a seafarer, even though you're working in all these remote places, that doesn't necessarily mean you can just get off and go to port.
Right.
You have to get cleared in, you have to pass customs, you have to check your passport.
Yeah.
You have to show all this documentation just to be able to go in. So they probably weren't allowed.
That's
they probably
so
weren't allowed.
awful.
They probably were obligated to stay on board.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, their company's not getting them money or provisions.
Right.
That's terrifying.
That's awful. Yeah, I can't imagine.
Yeah, and so 19 crew members at one time. Yeah. Okay, so the second case study we have, which is along very similar lines, Muhammad Aisha was a seafarer who was abandoned on motor vessel Amman. This happened May 5th, 2017, and he was abandoned on this ship for 4 years.
How does this happen?
Yeah, and this is something that I didn't really read about in the news. It didn't make international headlines until he was being freed.
Right.
Okay, so motor vessel Amman was it's a big ship as well. So it's a cargo ship, which was 100 meters or 328 feet. So again, not a small ship, a massive, massive ship. And it was detained in an Egyptian port. It had expired safety equipment and classification certificates. So basically, the boat wasn't being kept up to regulations is the best way to say that. So a lot of things were expired. It wasn't safe to be at sea, which means the company who owns the ship is responsible for getting that up to date. But in this circumstance, the company, again, didn't have the money. They were in financial difficulty and they couldn't pay, or they were unwilling to pay to, kind of get the ship back. So then the port authorities say, okay, well, you're not our problem because we don't own you and own the ship, and your company is not willing to pay, so what do we do? So basically the ship, or the port authorities then boarded the ship. At the time, the captain, who happened to be Egyptian, was ashore. So they brought a bunch of paperwork to the chief officer, and they had the chief officer, who is Muhammad, sign a legal document. And it turns out he was signing an order to become the ship's legal guardian. Yeah, which means he's left to be in charge of the ship.
So did they trick him into signing this?
Well, so he has come out and stated that he didn't understand what he was signing, and he only found out months later as other crew members were being allowed to leave. So remember, Muhammad is from Syria, he's Syrian, and he's on board a ship. They're in Egypt, they're in a foreign port. His captain's now ashore and gone. And he's just signed this document that he doesn't understand fully, but is being told that he has to sign. And so, yeah, as he's the chief officer, so he became the legal guardian of the ship and was obligated to stay on board.
So it sounds like the captain was sort of manipulating him, like, oh, well, we're in Egypt. I can get off because I'm a citizen here. But how do I get out of this situation?
Well, apparently it was the port authorities that came on, and they were just like, someone has to sign it. Captain's not here, and you're the next in line, kind of thing.
Oh my God.
So
crazy.
basically what that left is, so as crew started to get off, he started to realize, well, hang on, this means like I'm gonna be left here. So over 2 years, numbers started dwindling, and then he was completely left alone for 2 years. And there was the occasional security guard. His passport was confiscated by the Egyptian officials because he was now in charge of this ship. And the ship was at anchor. So it was just out anchor off the coast.
Oh my gosh.
No running water, no electricity, no fresh food. And he was on the ship alone. Do you know how scary that would be at night?
I can't even imagine. Like, how did he get food?
He didn't. He had the supply, I'm assuming like canned supplies, or maybe the security guard that had to come and check on him brought him stuff every now and then. But it sounds like it was pretty.
That is so insane that could happen. Like, why is there not a?
Think of how scary at night that must be. Again, this isn't like a yacht where it's like you've got a big flat screen TV. This is an empty cargo ship that was already it sounds, by the sounds of it, was like rust
that's
bucket.
like being in prison, like just being in solitary confinement, no interaction with people, not even really understanding what's going on. Like, was he even able to communicate with anybody other than the security guard? That is just so crazy.
Yeah, no, so it says he had very limited communication with anyone. Obviously, he didn't have anyone in person to communicate with.
Yeah.
And it's funny you say that because he is quoted as saying, it felt like a grave. It was a grave at night. He said, you can't see anything, you can't hear anything. It's like you're in a coffin. Yeah, and you can watch the video. There's a video online about this, and an interview once he was actually released. But he just says, imagine solitary confinement for 4 years.
Yeah, I can't imagine. So
he said that the bugs and the rodents started to come in, and imagine the smells. He's going to the bathroom and there's no running water.
Yeah.
And the sounds that the ship must make at night.
I don't understand why there's not some sort of international organization or something like that, where these boats have to pay into some sort of insurance policy that's, I don't know, some sort of global thing to protect people when this kind of thing happens. That is so unfair that he would ever have to go through something like that, and everyone else just gets off and he's stuck for years. That's insane.
Yeah, so he said he felt cornered by Egyptian law and ignored by the ship's owners, that he would go months without any communication about his status on board. The ship's owners reported that they can't force a judge to remove the legal guardianship, and they couldn't find a single person who would replace him on board. Yeah, no shit. No one's gonna volunteer to go live on an empty cargo ship
so
in the
sad.
middle. Yeah, and so he was quite the ship was anchored quite far away from shore.
Yeah.
And then a big storm came through and broke the anchorage, and the ship ended up drifting and running aground. And he said it was a grace of God, because then he was able to swim ashore every 2 to 3 days to get food, charge his phone, and get water.
Wow.
But then he had to swim back to, he knew he had to be,
how's he doing now?
Well, okay, so eventually, again, the ITF got involved.
So what does ITF stand for?
International Transport Workers Federation.
Oh.
So it's basically, I guess, kind of like a union to help seafarers.
Okay.
Yeah.
After 4 years, they got involved.
I think they were involved, but
trying to get him out.
Yeah, because basically they have to then work with the company. They have to work with all these parties, the Egyptian local authorities. Because again, the local authorities don't want this massive ship that's just going to be a rust bucket, sitting out there either.
There's no regulation for that. That's so crazy.
And if the ship's deemed not seaworthy, then who's going to pay to get it out of the water? Who's going to cut it into scrap metal? This is a lot of money. Someone has to be held financially responsible.
Right.
So eventually the ITF got involved, and they were able to secure his release by agreeing to have a local union representative in Egypt agree to be the ship's legal guardian from the shore side. So someone did volunteer to be in his position, but the agreement meant they didn't have to actually live on the boat. They could just do it from shore.
Oh,
but I'm like, why didn't they just like 3 years ago? That would have been nice. Like,
right, and still so what? It's still just sitting there off the coast of Egypt. It's just that now it's an Egyptian person.
Yeah, now it's more of a battle
Right.
between the company and the local authorities without a seafarer. Like, but you're right. Like, how is a seafarer involved? Like, you're not the head of the multi-million-dollar corporation.
Yeah, like these companies should be,
whatever.
from the moment that they decide to build a ship, they should be held liable.
Yeah.
Yes, for that type of a situation. Like the fact that he was somehow talked into signing something saying like, yes, I'll be this ship's owner, and then stuck there for 4 years is just
especially if you
beyond
didn't understand it. Because I'm
Right.
guessing the language barrier for one. Like he didn't understand it. He didn't know what he was getting himself into.
Right.
And then boom, he's on the ship by himself. And like it gets pretty dark. Like his interviews, he says, like he often, thought about committing suicide. His mom died when he was stranded. His brother, get this, his brother's also a seafarer, and his brother was on a ship that was passing his quite often, and they would wave, and he was like, but there's nothing I could do. I was bound by obligation to be on the ship. And this is just something like, I'm in yachting, obviously, so I'm not in the commercial side, but this is just something, like when I read this, I was like, that can't be possible.
Like how, right? Like how could he not, like, it's just so crazy that there wasn't a way for somebody, like, get a helicopter out there, pick him up, take him home so that he can.
But I guess then you go to prison, don't you? Because you're breaking your contract. But I mean, at this point, prison was probably a better option.
Well, why would he go to prison for breaking his contract?
So the local authorities, the Egyptian local authorities, are binding him to the boat. He's legally obligated to stay on board.
But what if he were able to be rescued by Syria, in like a situation like that?
It's not really how it works.
Like, I'm sure the resources, like, probably doesn't have the resources, but that to me is insane.
Yeah, I know. Well, I think as Americans, it's really hard to picture that. But again, you have to think you're a Syrian native on an Egyptian or on a foreign flag ship in an Egyptian port.
We're incredibly privileged here, so it's hard for us. Like, it's different.
But it's also like, I think this also, on like a lighter note, like with the show and things, people often are like, oh, well, this rule applies or this law applies, and people often forget, like, no, we're not.
Because it's all just maritime law.
Yeah, I might be American, but I work on a foreign flagged vessel that operates in foreign waters. It's not the same laws. They're not the same, you're not protected by the same acts and things. Yeah. Anyways, it does have a happy ending. Muhammad was then flown home to Syria and reunited with his family after 4 years. And the craziest part about this whole story is he is back at sea. He loves it. That's his livelihood. He's a chief officer, so he's worked his way up. He's a chief officer. He's back at sea today.
I wonder how his mental health is after going through something like that.
I'm sure it's going to take a long road to recovery. And so to kind of talk about ship abandonment and why and reasons for it.
Yeah.
So like we've touched on, a big one is economic reasons. So ships are usually, like big commercial ships are usually owned by a company. And when these companies have, difficulties with finances, they are unable to pay for repairs, for crew wages, port fees, cargo, the necessary like certifications and surveys, which then would deem the ship basically unseaworthy. So then not much you can do with it. You got to keep your ship up to date and safe. Otherwise it has to be.
It's so messed up that like somebody in like a finance and accounting department, like some company ends up failing because some people made some bad decisions, and then someone like Muhammad is the one who's paying for that for 4 years.
Yeah, or
crazy.
I kind of also feel like maybe they knew that the ship was getting to that point and they were just, milking it until it was. So it says like the ship becomes less expensive, it becomes less expensive to abandon the ship altogether than to try and operate it. Because ships do cost a lot. I mean, like the running cost of a ship is a lot. Like repairs, wages, all that stuff we just talked about. Plus for these big ships that are transiting, across the oceans, like fuel prices.
Oh yeah.
We're talking millions of dollars. So
that's what's so frustrating is these huge companies screw up, and then someone like Muhammad is the one who pays.
Well, yeah, that's why I was like,
it's just so messed up. To me. Yeah,
and the 19 other, they had to go on a hunger strike just to get the company to pay attention.
Yeah,
and they weren't even like, they just wanted their wages, like they just wanted to be back paid.
Yeah,
because they've spent 2 years on a ship, like pay them the money. And you know what the saddest part is their wages are probably pennies compared to what that company is
I'm
making.
sure. Well, and okay, so also like Muhammad, like he for sure was never compensated for all of that time that he spent out there.
Unless maybe they argued for him, like unless they got it
or
for
he
him.
sued or something like that.
Well,
maybe.
there's no way he can sue. That's the sad part. But he's back working at sea, so I'm guessing the ITF argued some bit for him.
Yeah.
So the IMO, which is the International Maritime Organization, reported that since 2004, there have been over 438 ships abandoned worldwide. And that means there's over 5,767 crew members along with them. That's that's not a small number. When I thought of like abandoned vessels, I was like, okay, maybe we've missed a few here and there, but
that's a
438.
And what happens to them? Like if they never get them out of the ocean, do they just sink and then there's
this
just
is the other thing.
waste in the water?
Yeah, so some do. Some just are left to drift. So apparently there are just ships that they know are drifting.
And this sort of even ties back to like the people on Whale Wars who are trying to get these people to surrender their ship, and then they sink it on purpose just to get rid of evidence. It's like just the
mindset of just like
and the
thoughtlessness
of like what that does.
Like imagine if there were like, okay, maybe there are, but imagine you're in Denver, Colorado this weekend and there's just like 10 abandoned cars somewhere or something,
Right.
You wouldn't think that they're just littered around the streets. They'd be at like a lot or something,
Right.
But here, they're just floating around.
Yeah, that is really crazy.
The ocean. And some of them have crew on them. Like there's people on these ships.
It's crazy that like big companies, when they have a situation like that, it's like, it's not just the ship being abandoned, it's human lives being abandoned.
And the fact that they're saying like, well, your lives aren't worth us.
That is so disturbing. Yeah, like that's so sad. Ugh.
Yeah.
I can't believe.
The saddest part is this number is severely underreported, and it's believed to be on the climb upwards, especially after COVID.
Jeez.
Obviously, we saw during COVID the shipping industry had a huge impact. And so
wow.
Yeah, something to think about. This is definitely something I just never thought was an issue.
Also, oh my gosh, and someone like living in a landlocked state, like this is the kind of thing we would never even think about.
It gives like new meaning to that like ghost ship.
Yeah, that's
creepy.
Scary. That's super
we're
scary.
glad in this instance, all the seafarers are home safe.
Yeah.
That is our Dangers at Sea episode.
Yeah, thanks for those stories. That was very interesting.